Hey everyone, it's Movie Lover 120 here, and I'm here with a brand new movie review. And much like with last week's, this is going to be a follow-up to one of my Halloween horror movie reviews last year. And you're probably wondering, but if this is, but if that's a follow-up, shouldn't we be doing it in October? Well, technically, this one, this follow-up is actually not really a horror film as its predecessor mostly was. Yeah, this one kind of goes more in the action territory. And that is going to be for none other than 2002, aka the sequel to 1998's to the 1998 film 2002's Blade 2, the second installment of the Wesley Snipes trilogy. So, we all remember back in 1998, a movie called Blade was released. It was Marvel's very first theatrically released feature. Before that, they were basically known for making garbage TV movies like the 90s Fantastic Four, the 90s Captain America, and the 90s Punisher. And they all sucked. Even though they weren't really supposed to be theatrical releases to begin with, they were still garbage. Even though they were TV films. Like, even the Adam West Batman TV stuff was way better and much more successful than those. And DC was pretty much the only comic book company that was profiting around the 80s, 70s, and 90s at the time. Well, DC was already suffering in the 90s with garbage like Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. The comic book genre was in a funk around the 90s, but near the end of the 90s in 1988, Blade was officially released to cinemas, and while it was mixed received by critics, audiences loved it. They absolutely adored it. They loved its faithfulness to the dark tone of the comics. They loved all the gore. They loved that it was as gory as the comics. It was not kid friendly. It was even considered very violent and dark for a comic book movie at the time. Even more so than that previous record holder, Batman Returns. And it was actually pretty decently profitable at the box office with $131 million worldwide on a $45 million budget. That may not be very profitable, but considering this was Marvel's first attempt at a theatrical release, it was actually very saying something. And of course, following the success of Blade, the comic book movie industry was officially saved. And they were finally back to making good ones again. Had it not been for this film, we probably wouldn't have saw films like The Dark Knight or Batman Begins or Iron Man or the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy. We probably would have never saw those had it not been for Blade. So of course, following Blade's success, Marvel began adapting more comics like X-Men in 2000, Spider-Man Sam Raimi trilogy beginning in 2002, Daredevil, Ghost Rider, Punisher, you get the point. Of course, the ones like Daredevil, Punisher, Fantastic Four, and even freaking Ghost Rider were all didn't meet the same success as Blade. The only ones that kind of really met the same success as Blade were X-Men and Spider-Man, and that was kind of it. But not just its success didn't inspire just other Marvel adaptations. It also inspired them to actually decide to go and release a sequel in 2002 called Blade 2. I've already mentioned that part, guys, but whatever. So yeah, they were making a really risky move of releasing it in March 2002. And of course, when it was released, it actually made even more money than the first one. It made, for a sequel released at a pretty bad time at the time, it made over 32 million domestically on its opening weekend and grossed over 82 million domestically at the box office and made over 155 million worldwide. And it did get some improved reviews from critics, and there's some fans that admit they like it more than the first one, but I'm not one of those fans. I still like the first film better, and we're going to get to why. But here we go. What's this movie about? Well, a rare mutation has occurred within the vampire community, the Reaper. A vampire so consumed with an insatiable bloodlust that they prey on vampires as well as humans, transforming victims who are unlucky enough to survive into reapers themselves. Now their quickly expanding population threatens the existence of vampires, and soon there won't be enough humans in the world to satisfy their bloodlust. Blade, who had officially just found and brought back Whistler. Spoilers if you have not seen the first one, guys. And didn't know. Teams up with an army expert named Scud and curiously summoned by the Shadow Council. The Council reluctantly admits that they are in a dire situation and they require Blade's assistance. Blade then tenuously enters into an alliance with the Blood Pack, an elite team of vampires trained in all modes of combat to defeat the Reaper threat. Blade's team and the Blood Pack are the only line of defense which can prevent the Reaper population from wiping out the vampire and human populations. So yeah. So what are my thoughts? Well, it's not as good as the first one. Yeah, I hate to admit that, guys. But it's still a okay, fine sequel. Nonetheless, it's not terrible, but it's still a pretty fun sequel. It's pretty action-packed. It's got some good action scenes, and yeah. But here's why it's still a pretty good sequel. It still refines most of the elements seen in the first Blade movie. Guillermo del Toro is endlessly imaginative when it comes to creating new style action ideas for the vampire mythology. He would kind of take this stuff and go direct Hellboy after this film. And while the plot doesn't have much character development, it has just enough interesting twists to keep viewers interested. And I think there's probably the one standout of the entire film, and probably the best part of the character in the film. And that is Ron Perlman as Dieter Reinhardt, Blade's new nemesis in this film. Like, he's just very entertaining. It's nice to see, like, it's kind of, after watching the Hellboy films, you can just picture it just Blade fighting Hellboy. Fighting Hellboy as his nemesis. Yeah. And it's like the first one. It's still a violent and action-filled journey made to a comic book world, and Del Toro is not taking any prisoners. Now, despite it still being violent, there's not as much gore as the first one, in my opinion. There's not as much violent stuff as the first one, really. I mean, yes, the gore is dark tone is still in the movie, but it's just not quite as it's just not as extremely dark as the first one was, which was kind of a letdown. But well. And it's essentially a platform for Snipes to have fun with his most renowned character, and he does so with very entertaining results. The movie they actually make him a little more entertaining in this one. They make him have a little more humor in this one, which was actually kind of nice. And that's reasonably well-rounded characters, suspicion piled on top of everyone, some amazing set pieces, and a good sense of humor. And the impact of all the blood and guts is reduced by the obvious fantasy of the fights, but even though it is still pretty powerful and fun to watch, it kind of tones down the movie, really. Which is kind of weak because Blade is kind of a violent, gory character, which would kind of make sense for that criticism. Now there are still bad qualities like the sometimes shaky CGI work. Some of the special effects look cheap to say the least, especially the use of digital stands for the actors that are used in some action scenes to spice them up a bit. So yeah, those bad qualities are kind of why it's not as good of a movie as the first one. But all in all, I still think it's a fine sequel. If you definitely like the first one, you'll probably like this one as well. You might like it more than the first one. You might not like it as much as the first one, but it's going to depend on opinions, really. But I just consider it a just fine sequel, which is not bad. But the idea of a sequel to an iconic comic book masterpiece like Blade being just a fine, fun sequel is kind of a little skeptical.
I am going to give Blade 2 a 7 out of 10.
So once again, still a pretty good Marvel film at the least. It's just not as good as the first one. I mean, but still, it's still freaking better compared to the next movie that came after this one. Oh dear God. You just wait until I get to the third one. Oh no. But anyways, that'll be it for this review. Thank y'all for watching, and if you like this and want to see more, and don't forget to like, subscribe to Movie Lover 120.